The wave hadn't even broken yet. Just a monstrous, churning wall of gray-green water towering over the tiny inflatable raft like a liquid skyscraper. 1 minute the kid was splashing happily, oblivious. The next he was clawing at the slick plastic, his small face a mask of dawning terror. I didn't have time for pleasantries, for witty banter, for the usual 10 minutes of internal monologue that plagues my less crucial decisions, like which brand of excessively priced organic kale to begrudgingly purchase. All that mattered was the rapidly disappearing patch of blonde hair getting sucked out with the tide. "Brenda, you absolute menace!" I roared, more to the uncaring ocean than to the looming figure I could just make out on her elevated deck, binoculars glued to her face like some sort of suburban supervillain. 2 minutes. That's all it had been since her freshly erected, aggressively beige fence had choked off the lifeguard access, a monument to her unwavering belief that perfectly manicured dunes were somehow more valuable than human life. 2 minutes since Jake and Chloe, bless their sun-kissed, perpetually stressed hearts, had started their half-mile sprint from the public access, a distance that felt like an eternity when someone was actively drowning. My internal clock, the one honed by years of screaming sirens and the metallic tang of adrenaline, was screaming louder than the kid's unseen mother on the shore. There was no debate, no committee meeting, no tedious reading of HOA bylaws, just raw, unadulterated instinct. My garage door, thankfully already a little wonky from years of salty air and my general lack of home maintenance enthusiasm, shrieked in protest as I yanked it open. My rescue ski, a trusty old Sea-Doo I'd lovingly nicknamed Salty Bastard, sat gleaming under its tarp, a relic from a life I'd tried to leave behind. Paramedic turned. Disgruntled beach bum. Yeah, that had been the plan. Trading life or death for lukewarm coffee and the soothing rhythm of mediocrity. Brenda Buttersworth and her tyrannical reign of beige had effectively torpedoed that aspiration. The makeshift dolly system my dad and I had cobbled together, a Frankensteinian creation of old lawnmower wheels and rusted steel pipes, wasn't pretty, but it was functional. Years ago, when I'd first bought this place, the idea of launching a jet ski directly from my yard seemed like the ultimate freedom. Now it felt like an act of desperate rebellion, with a grunt that strained something in my lower back, another lingering souvenir from my glory days. I heaved the salty bastard onto the dolly. The tires whined in protest as I dragged it across my patchy, decidedly non-regulation lawn, each bump and divot a testament to my ongoing battle with the HOA's landscaping Gestapo. Down the short, sandy slope towards the water we lurched, the jet ski bucking like a stubborn mule. The kid was further out now, the inflatable a mere speck against the vast indifference of the ocean. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. This wasn't a drill, this was real. Finally, with a splash and a sigh of relief from the abused dolly, the salty bastard was in the shallows. I scrambled onto the seat, the familiar contours comforting beneath me. The key, always kept clipped to my board shorts, went into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life, the sudden noise a defiant shout against the otherwise peaceful morning. I glanced back, just for a split second. Brenda was still there, a small, rigid figure on her deck, the binoculars now lowered. Her face, even from this distance, radiated a potent cocktail of shock and incandescent rage. It was a truly beautiful sight. 2 fingers, extended with a casual disrespect that years of dealing with bureaucratic nonsense had perfected, were my parting words. Then, I slammed the throttle forward. The salty bastard leaped across the water, leaving a frothy white trail in its wake, and I focused on the only thing that mattered, the tiny, terrified figure being swallowed by the unforgiving sea. My post-rescue adrenaline come-down hit somewhere between explaining to the frantic but eternally grateful parents that, yes, their little Timmy was going to be just fine, albeit with a newfound fear of inflatable aquatic devices, and the arrival of Officer Miller. Miller, a man whose default expression seemed to be a weary sigh held captive behind a thin veneer of professional courtesy, surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen this particular brand of small-town drama unfold countless times. Brenda, predictably, was in full Karen regalia, clipboard clutched like a shield, visor casting a shadow over her furiously pursed lips. She was holding court with Officer Davis, the fresh-faced rookie, whose uniform still looked like it hadn't quite settled onto his frame. "Officer," Brenda's voice dripped with indignation, each syllable perfectly enunciated. "This man flagrantly violated multiple HOA bylaws and town ordinances. He created an unauthorized watercraft launch point, operated an unregistered vessel in a restricted zone, and caused significant disruption to the peace and tranquility of our community." Timmy's dad, a slightly disheveled but immensely relieved man named Dave, stepped forward, his arm protectively around his still shaky son. "Are you kidding me? He just saved my kid's life. Your stupid fence almost cost him everything." Officer Davis, looking slightly overwhelmed by the rapidly escalating decibel level, diligently scribbled in his notepad. Officer Miller, meanwhile, fixed me with a knowing look. "Alex," he said, his voice calm amidst the rising tide of accusations, "mind giving me your version of events?" I shrugged, trying to look contrite, but probably failing miserably. "Well, officer, there was this kid, see? Being dragged out by a rather enthusiastic rip current. The Lifeguards." I gestured towards a winded Jake and Chloe, who had just arrived, their faces etched with concern. "We're a little geographically challenged due to certain recent infrastructural changes. My trusty salty bastard and I happened to be in the neighborhood. Seemed like the neighborly thing to do." Brenda sputtered. "Neighborly? He bulldozed through landscaping. He endangered himself and others." "Endangered?" Timmy piped up, his voice still a little shaky. "He was really fast, like a superhero on a jet ski." Miller allowed a ghost of a smile to flicker across his lips. He turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, while I understand your concerns about community regulations, it seems Mr. Henderson here took action to prevent a potential tragedy. Unless you're suggesting he should have consulted the HOA rulebook before rescuing a drowning child?" Brenda's face tightened. "The Lifeguards would have arrived eventually." Jake and Chloe exchanged a pointed glance. "Ma'am," Jake interjected politely, "with the beach access blocked, it adds at least 5 minutes to our response time in that area. 5 minutes is a long time in an emergency." Miller nodded slowly. "Right. Well, it seems we have a situation where someone's life was potentially saved. I'm not seeing any immediate criminal violations here, ma'am. However," he turned his gaze back to me, a hint of warning in his eyes, "the town does have ordinances regarding unapproved watercraft launches and property modifications. I'd advise you to look into those, Alex." "Duly noted, officer," I said, trying to sound more respectful than I felt. Brenda, however, was far from finished. "This is outrageous. I will be contacting the HOA board. This is a clear violation and it will not stand." She punctuated her pronouncement with a dramatic flourish of her clipboard before marching back towards her pristine beige fortress. Miller watched her go, then let out a long, weary sigh. "Look, Alex," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You did a good thing, a damn good thing. But that woman, she's got more free time and more determination than a honey badger with a caffeine addiction. Tread carefully." He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning to deal with the paperwork and the lingering crowd. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the beach, I stood there, salty bastard gleaming beside me, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and foreboding. I'd won this round, maybe, but I had a sinking feeling that the battle had just begun. The following Monday, the postman, a man whose usual demeanor ranged from vaguely cheerful to neutrally indifferent, approached my door with a look of grim resignation. He thrust a thick, certified mail envelope into my hand. "Here you go, Alex. Looks official." Official was an understatement. The envelope practically hummed with legalistic menace. Inside was a veritable paper blizzard from the law offices of Grimsby, Snodgrass, and Bottomley, attorneys at law, representing the Seagull Point Estates Homeowners Association. The list of my transgressions read like a particularly dull chapter of a dystopian novel. Section 7. 4. Unauthorized landscape alteration. Specifically, the faint tracks left by the salty bastard's ill-fated journey across my lawn. Apparently, my crabgrass was not sufficiently resilient to withstand the weight of heroic intervention. Section 12. 1. Operation of heavy machinery on residential lawn. The heavy machinery in question being a personal watercraft weighing approximately 800 pounds, significantly less than your average riding lawnmower, but apparently deemed equivalent to a tank in the eyes of HOA. Section 9. 5. Noise ordinance violation. Non-approved engine decibels. The brief but undeniably loud roar of the salty bastard's engine as I launched to save a human life apparently exceeded the decibel limit for peaceful enjoyment of community amenities. Section 18. 2. Creation of an unsanctioned water access point. The few feet of disturbed sand where the salty bastard met the ocean now constituted a significant environmental hazard and a blight on the community's natural beauty. The fines for these alleged infractions totaled a truly breathtaking sum, enough to make my already precarious finances weep openly. The letter concluded with a stern warning: failure to pay these exorbitant fees and remediate the damages, which, as far as I could tell, meant making my lawn look like it had never witnessed an act of heroism, within 30 days, would result in a lien being placed on my property. As I stared at the small mountain of paperwork on my kitchen counter, a slow burn of anger began to simmer beneath the surface of my initial exasperation. This wasn't about bylaws or property values. This was about Brenda flexing her petty power, about punishing anyone who dared to deviate from her rigid vision of suburban perfection. "Oh, you want a war, Brenda?" I muttered to the empty room, the salty air thick with unspoken defiance. "You want to play hardball? Fine, let's play." The thought of simply paying the fines and groveling for forgiveness flickered through my mind for all of about 3 seconds. That wasn't me. I wasn't built to back down from a bully, especially one who prioritized perfectly manicured petunias over human well-being. She thought a stack of paper could scare me? I'd dealt with insurance companies after ambulance crashes. I'd navigated the labyrinthine bureaucracy of hospital admissions. I'd even survived a particularly aggressive audit by the IRS. Don't ask. This was just another form of paperwork-induced torment. But this time, it was personal. My gaze drifted towards the small, overgrown patch of land next to my property line, the spot where the old Lifeguard access path had been before Brenda's Great Wall of Beige. She hated that little dirt track, saw it as an eyesore, a symbol of the outside world encroaching on her precious Seagull Point estates. Fine, I'd give her something to really hate. I wasn't just going to fight these ridiculous fines. I was going on the offensive. I was going to build a new path, a better path, A glorious, concrete, city-approved, Brenda-proof monument to my right to save people from drowning. I was going to build a boat ramp. My first call was to Barry's Coastal Contracting, a name I'd found with a suspiciously high number of 5-star reviews. Barry himself sounded enthusiastic on the phone, full of promises about efficient timelines and top-quality workmanship. That enthusiasm evaporated faster than a spilled beer on a hot summer day when I mentioned the location, Seagull Point. And the client? Yours truly, the neighborhood pariah currently locked in a death match with the HOA president. Seagull Point? Barry's voice suddenly acquired a nervous tremor. As in, Brenda Buttersworth's Seagull Point? The one and only, I confirmed, bracing myself for the inevitable brush-off. Well, you see, Mr. Henderson, Barry stammered, my back's been acting up something fierce lately, and, we're booked solid for the next, well, indefinitely, really. Best of luck with your project. The line went dead. Apparently, the fear of Brenda's wrath was a more potent motivator than the promise of a hefty paycheck. Sal, my aforementioned beer-bellied neighbor with a heart of gold and a deep-seated disdain for all things HOA, proved to be a far more reliable resource. You need Gus, he'd declared, puffing out his chest like a seasoned general outlining a battle plan. Gus is concrete, old school, doesn't take any guff, and he's got a history with the Seagull Point HOA. A colorful history. Sal's eyes twinkled with mischievous glee. Gus turned out to be exactly as Sal had described. A grizzled, barrel-chested man whose face looked like it had been sculpted by years of sun, wind, and the occasional flying piece of concrete. He answered my call with a gruff, "Yeah?" that brooked no nonsense. I explained the situation, the rescue, Brenda's tyrannical fence, the ludicrous fines, and my audacious plan to build a boat ramp. Gus listened in silence, punctuated only by the occasional grunt that could have meant anything from mild interest to profound indigestion. Finally, when I'd laid out the full, glorious, spite-fueled vision, Gus let out a sound that started as a low rumble in his chest and blossomed into a full-blown, toothy grin. "So," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp, "you want to build a reinforced concrete boat ramp to code on your property line, primarily to piss off the local busybody?" "I'd prefer the term ensure rapid access for life-saving watercraft," I corrected him. "But yeah, that's the gist of it." Gus let out a hearty laugh that sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Kid, I love it. Despite surcharges is an extra 15% for my emotional satisfaction. We start Monday." And just like that, with a handshake that felt like being clamped in a vice, the Ramp of Spite project was officially underway. The battle lines had been drawn. The concrete was about to pour. And Brenda Buttersworth had absolutely no idea what was coming. You are absolutely right, my apologies. The initial response was merely the opening act, and I fell short of the requested word count. Let's rectify that immediately. Here is the continuation of the story, picking up right after Alex has hired Gus and is preparing for the war to come. We will dive deep into the construction, the daily battles of attrition with Brenda, and the assembly of Alex's unlikely army, pushing us much closer to the 9,000-word mark. A handshake from Gus wasn't just an agreement, it was a transfer of energy. It felt like I'd just shaken hands with a grumpy, concrete-dusted grizzly bear who had decided to adopt me as his angry, ramp-building cub. For the first time since Brenda's laminated declaration of war appeared, I felt a flicker of genuine, unadulterated hope. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was our fight. And Gus looked like a man who hadn't lost a fight since the Carter administration. But a contractor, even one as formidable as Gus, was only one piece of the puzzle. Brenda's power wasn't in her physical presence. It was in the narrative she controlled. In her world, I was the rogue element, the noisy, lawn-destroying outsider disrupting the serene, beige-tinted harmony of Seagull Point. To win, I needed more than just rebar and permits. I needed a counter-narrative. I needed allies. My first stop was the Lifeguard Tower. Jake and Chloe were on duty, scanning the waves with a practiced, almost bored intensity. The tower itself smelled of salt, sunscreen, and faint teenage anxiety. I explained my plan, laying out the blueprints Gus had sketched on a napkin right there in my driveway. Jake whistled, low and long. A full concrete ramp? Dude, that's ambitious. It's necessary, I said, leaning against the railing. Look, Brenda isn't going to stop. That fence is a symbol. She's telling everyone that her rules are more important than your response time, than that kid's life. Chloe, who was usually the more reserved of the two, set her binoculars down with a firm thud. She's right, she said to Jake. Remember last summer? The lady who dislocated her shoulder near the old pier? We had to carry her all the way back to the main access on a backboard because the ATV couldn't handle the soft sand in that stretch. That path was vital. I know, but getting involved with an HOA dispute? Jake trailed off, the caution of a county employee warring with his conscience. Our supervisor, he hates getting dragged into stuff like this. He'll say it's not our place. I'm not asking you to protest or picket, I clarified. I just need a statement, an official one if you can. Just the facts, your professional opinion on how the closure of that access point affects your ability to do your job. That's it. It's not about taking sides, it's about public safety. They looked at each other. The internal debate was silent, but palpable. Finally, Jake nodded. All right, we'll write it up, but we have to run it by our supervisor. No promises he'll sign off on it. That's all I can ask, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Thank you, both of you. My next call was easier, but far more emotional. I dialed the number Dave, the rescued boy's father, had pressed into my hand. Alex, I was hoping you'd call, he answered before I could even get a word out. How are you? We wanted to send you something, a gift basket or, I don't know, a new jet ski. Is that a thing people give as gifts? I chuckled. Thank you is more than enough, Dave. The salty bastard is still running fine. Listen, the reason I'm calling, I'm in a bit of a jam with my HOA. I gave him the condensed version of events. The fence, the fines, Brenda's crusade, and my plan for the ramp of spite. When I finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, a heavy, charged pause that made my stomach clench. That woman, Dave said finally, his voice low and seething with a cold fury I hadn't heard before. That woman stood on her deck and watched my son almost die because of a fence. Alex, what do you need? A witness? A character reference? Do you need me to stand on the steps of town hall with a bullhorn? Just say the word. My wife, my son, all of us. We'll be there. You have our word. The conviction in his voice was so powerful, it almost knocked me back. This was it. This was the narrative. A grateful father, a hero's testimony. It was pure, simple, and something Brenda's army of bylaws couldn't fight. My little alliance was forming. The grizzled contractor, the lifeguard brigade, and the rescued family. It sounded like a B-list superhero team, and I was their snarky, slightly out-of-shape leader. The Sunday before construction began felt like the night before a major battle. I did a final patrol of my property line, the imaginary battlefield where Gus's heavy machinery would soon clash with Brenda's iron will. I saw a flicker of movement from her house. The curtains in her second-story window twitched. She was watching, always watching. Bring it on, Brenda, I thought, a grim smile touching my lips. The concrete is coming. Monday morning arrived, not with the gentle chirping of seagulls, but with the guttural roar of a diesel engine and the rhythmic, earth-shaking thump-thump-thump of heavy equipment rolling down my street. Gus's crew didn't so much arrive as they did materialize, a well-oiled machine of steel, sweat, and grunted commands. A massive backhoe, looking absurdly out of place on our quiet residential street, crawled into my yard, its giant metal claw poised like a raptor ready to strike. By 7:01 a.m., the first scoop of my non-regulation lawn was being unceremoniously dumped into a waiting truck. The sound was glorious. It was the sound of progress. It was the sound of sweet, petty revenge. It was also, apparently, Brenda's alarm clock. By 7:03 a.m., she was there. Dressed in a crisp pastel-pink tracksuit, visor perfectly aligned, she stood on the absolute edge of her property line, phone held aloft, documenting the carnage. Her expression was a mask of puerile, unadulterated horror, as if Gus's backhoe was digging up ancient burial grounds instead of a few square feet of crabgrass and sandy soil. Gus, who was directing the backhoe operator with a series of complex hand signals that looked vaguely like a form of martial arts, didn't even grant her a glance. He just continued his work, a stoic island of competence in a sea of Brenda's simmering rage. This became our morning ritual. Gus's crew would start work with brutal efficiency at 7 a.m. sharp. Brenda would appear moments later, phone recording, clipboard at the ready. She'd patrol the perimeter, her eyes scanning for the tiniest infraction. A speck of mud on the street, a misplaced traffic cone, a decibel level that might be disturbing the delicate sensibilities of the neighborhood squirrels. Sal, true to his word, made the whole spectacle his personal morning entertainment. He'd amble over from his house around 7:15 a.m., carrying a thermos of coffee and a box of donuts for the crew. He'd set up a faded lawn chair at a safe distance and provide a running commentary, like a golf announcer at the world's most aggressive landscaping tournament. "Oh, look at that, Brenda," he'd call out, his voice carrying easily in the morning air. "See the clean lines on that excavation? That's professionalism, that is. You can't buy that kind of quality, you gotta earn it." Brenda would just stand there, her jaw tightening, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. The calls to the city started on day 2. Mr. Henderson, the code inspector, arrived in his little white pickup, looking vaguely annoyed to be summoned so early. He trudged over, clipboard in hand. "Gus," he said, with the familiarity of a man who has inspected 1,000 construction sites. "Brenda here says you're violating setback ordinances." Gus simply grunted and pointed to a small wooden stake in the ground, a bright orange ribbon tied around it. "Survey was done last week, Bill. We're 2 feet inside his property line. All permitted?" Henderson nodded, made a check mark on his form, and glanced at Brenda. "He's compliant, Brenda." "His equipment is blocking the road," she countered, pointing an accusatory finger at the dump truck. "It's within the permitted cone zone for a residential construction site," Henderson sighed. "It's all in the paperwork I'm sure you've already requested from the city clerk's office." He didn't wait for an answer, just trudged back to his truck and drove away. This, too, became part of the daily dance. Brenda would call, Henderson would arrive, look around for 30 seconds, pronounce everything in order, and leave, his sighs growing heavier with each passing day. By Friday, he just rolled down his window as he drove by. "Everything good, Gus?" he'd yell. "Yep," Gus would yell back. "Have a nice day, Brenda!" Henderson would shout before speeding off, leaving Brenda standing in a cloud of dust and impotent fury. Gus's crew, a trio of guys named Marco, Dwayne, and Carlos, quickly picked up on the dynamic. They were professional and efficient, but they weren't immune to the absurdity of the situation. Marco, the youngest of the crew, started a Brenda sighting pool, the pot growing with each day she showed up in a new, more aggressively pastel-colored tracksuit. I think flamingo pink was the winning color that first week. The climax of the week came on Wednesday, the day of the concrete pour. This was the big one, the point of no return. A massive concrete mixer, its barrel churning with a sloshing, guttural rhythm, backed slowly down the street. The driver, a young kid with a face full of panic, looked like he was defusing a bomb. "Just get it in the chute, son," Gus said, his voice a calming baritone. "Easy does it. Don't spill a drop on our precious asphalt." The driver, sweating profusely despite the cool morning air, began to maneuver the truck into position. And that's when Brenda made her move. In a maneuver of breathtaking audacity, she drove her golf cart, her pearl-white, HOA-approved electric-powered chariot of justice, directly behind the concrete truck, blocking it from backing up the final few feet. She sat there, arms crossed, a silent, smug sentinel of obstruction. The truck driver slammed on his brakes. Gus stared, his expression unreadable. Sal, from his lawn chair, actually let out a slow clap. "I've got to hand it to her," he chortled. "The woman's got nerve." Gus walked calmly to the back of the truck. He didn't yell. He didn't gesticulate. He just stood there and stared at Brenda. It was the kind of stare that could curdle milk from 50 paces. He just stood and stared and waited. The concrete mixer continued to churn, a ticking clock of hardening cement. The driver looked like he was about to have a nervous breakdown. Finally, after a full, agonizing minute of silent warfare, Gus spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a diamond saw. "Move the cart." Brenda didn't flinch. "You are creating a public nuisance and a safety hazard. I will not move until this monstrosity is removed from our street." Gus nodded slowly. Then he pulled out his phone. "Yeah, Bill, Gus. Got a situation down here at the Henderson job. Yeah, the concrete truck is being illegally blocked by a non-street legal vehicle. Yep, a golf cart. The lady in the pink tracksuit. Uh-huh. Okay, see you in 5. He hung up the phone and went back to staring. The color drained from Brenda's face. The thought of getting a ticket from her beleaguered nemesis, Officer Miller, was apparently a bridge too far. With a look of pure venom directed at me, she put the golf cart in reverse and retreated to her driveway in silent defeat. The concrete poured smoothly after that, a beautiful, flowing river of gray that filled the wooden forms Gus's crew had so meticulously built. As the crew worked to smooth the surface, I felt a surge of triumph. The ramp was real. It was taking shape. It was a solid, tangible symbol of my defiance. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I was actually winning. That, of course, was my mistake. I had underestimated the depths of Brenda's resourcefulness. I had assumed the war would be fought with tape measures and code inspectors. I had no idea she was about to escalate to weapons of mass bureaucratic destruction. The next week, the ramp was curing under thick plastic sheeting. The heavy equipment was gone, and a fragile peace had settled over Seagull Point. Gus's crew was handling the finishing work, and the end was in sight. I was starting to breathe easier. Sal and I had even enjoyed a celebratory beer on my porch the evening before, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that were definitely not on the HOA's approved palette. The blow came on a Tuesday. It wasn't a loud, dramatic arrival like Gus's backhoe. It was quiet, insidious. A dark blue sedan with the official city crest on the door pulled up not to my house, but to Brenda's. A woman in a severe gray suit got out, carrying a leather briefcase. They spoke on Brenda's porch for nearly an hour. I watched from my window, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. This wasn't Mr. Henderson. This was someone new. Someone important. An hour later, the woman in the gray suit walked over to my property. She didn't knock on my door. She simply walked onto my lawn, her sensible heels sinking slightly into the grass, and approached the half-finished ramp. Gus and his crew stopped their work, watching her with wary curiosity. "Which one of you is Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her voice crisp and devoid of any emotion. "That's me," I said, walking out to meet her. She handed me a business card. "Cynthia Wells, Coastal Resources Division." She glanced from the card back to my beautiful, nearly complete ramp. "Mr. Henderson, I'm afraid we have a problem." My heart sank. "Coastal Resources? All my permits are from the City Building Department. They're in order." "That may be," she said, pulling a folded document from her briefcase. "But the Building Department doesn't have jurisdiction over the coastal setback line, which, according to our most recent surveys, your new construction appears to violate." "Violate how?" Gus interjected, stepping forward. "We're 2 feet inside his property line." Cynthia Wells gave Gus a withering look, as if he were a particularly uninteresting insect. "The property line is irrelevant. I'm referring to the presence of Ammophila breviligulata." I stared at her blankly. "The what now?" "American beach grass. More specifically," she consulted her document, "the whispering sea oats varietal. It's a protected species vital for dune stabilization. Any new, non-permeable construction within 50 feet of a documented patch requires a full environmental impact review and a special permit from our division, a permit which you do not have." I was floored. "Whispering sea oats? You're telling me this entire project is being shut down because of some grass?" It sounded like something out of a comedy sketch. "It's not some grass, Mr. Henderson," she said coolly. "It's a critical part of the coastal ecosystem that your neighbor," she gestured vaguely towards Brenda's house, where I could see the curtain twitch again, "was civic-minded enough to bring to our attention." Civic-minded. The woman was a one-man wrecking crew of bureaucratic torpedoes. She must have spent days, maybe weeks, poring over obscure environmental regulations, searching for the one silver bullet that could kill my project. And she'd found it. Before I could even formulate a response, Cynthia Wells pulled a large, blood-red sticker from her briefcase. She walked over to the wooden form at the head of the ramp and slapped it on with a sickening finality. "Stop work order." The words were stark, brutal. All construction activity on this site was to cease immediately, pending the outcome of the environmental review. Violations were punishable by fines that made my HOA notices look like pocket change. Cynthia Wells gave a curt nod, turned on her heel, and walked back to her sedan without another word. The car pulled away, leaving a profound, deafening silence in its wake. The birdsong, the distant sound of the waves, the very air seemed to have been sucked into the void left by her departure. Gus, Marco, Dwayne, and Carlos just stood there, tools in hand, staring at the red sticker. For the first time since I'd met him, Gus looked defeated. He ran a hand over his weary face. "Whispering sea oats," he muttered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of disbelief. 30 years I've been doing this. 30 years. Never heard of it." I walked over to the ramp, my beautiful monument to defiance, and touched the red sticker. It felt like a mortal wound. The silence from Gus's crew was worse than the noise of construction had ever been. The half-finished ramp no longer looked like a symbol of victory. It looked like a ruin, a tombstone marking the death of my rebellion. From across the way, on her deck, Brenda emerged. She wasn't holding binoculars or a phone. She just stood there, arms crossed, and across the distance I saw her smile. It was a small, tight, triumphant smirk. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt a crushing, hopeless wave of despair. She was going to win. She had found a way to use the full weight of the government, the very environment itself, as her personal weapon against me. And I had no idea how to fight back.